Thank you, Mindy. It is beautiful, and just want to give a few shout out to the comments that are out there. Joe Brock, your last comment. I mean, you say loving the worship set today makes me miss harmonizing with you guys, and I agree. Man, it's sucks to be kind of where we are right now, but this is what we do. We press on, and yeah, all of you out there, Daphne, Adam, Serena, um, yeah, just thank you for tuning in. And so, anyways, without further ado, let me introduce our speaker today. Um, it is my privilege, nay, it is my honor to introduce the one and only Josh Brock. And so,
There's got to
and
be more than one
so,
in the world, Gary.
Josh and I have been good friends for a few years now. First got to know him back at New Hope Lucas, and also he's just a neighbor. He lives right down the street from me. Him and his family, his kids, and we have kids around the same age. So it's just been really cool to get to know him and just be doing this thing together. And yeah, I mean, one thing that I'd say about Josh is he's definitely a deeply spiritual guy, and I really got to know that. We've been on a few guys trips together, and I've kind of spent some car time with him. If you've ever done that with anybody, you get some windshield time. You really get to kind of connect. And yeah, Josh is a deeply spiritual dude, and so I really think you're going to enjoy what he has to share today. Um, and if you may or may not know, but Josh is also a firefighter. So I just think he's like one of these guys who's got some real skin in the game, when it comes to serving, to loving well. And, he's like what I would say, like a Christian, with skin in the game that, he's just, it's not just talk. So anyways, without any further ado, I said that twice already. Um, but yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Josh. And
Awesome.
before I
Yeah.
do that, let me pray for you. Yeah, Father God, we thank you today for time together amongst all of our friends who are just not with us in person, but who are with us spiritually. All of us tuned in, and to those who will watch later, God, I thank you, and I pray for Josh that you would just put yeah, your love in his heart in this moment, God, and that he wouldn't worry about a thing, God, that he would just be himself, and that your words and your message that you've put on him, Lord, would just flow through, and that we would be receptive, that our hearts and minds would be open, God, and that you're going to do a good thing through Josh and in us. So we ask that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Wow. Thanks. Thanks for that, Gary. Really appreciate that. So I want to say something real quick. This is very strange because I don't have an instrument in my hand, nor is there a microphone in front of me, which is kind of my comfortable place when we do online church. And then when it comes to talking, I like to see people's faces. So this is very far out of my comfort zone as far as not being able to see faces. And I'm literally talking to a screen that's a mirror image of me, which is odd. So I'm going to do my best to look at the camera throughout the night so that we can make some eye contact through technology. Um, but yeah, I just want to say this is a new deal for me. I've actually never spoken at a church service before. So this has been fun, preparing for this and getting to talk to you tonight. I do truly miss you guys. I wish I was hoping that the first time I ever spoke at the table was going to be live, but this is where we're at, right? This is the social distancing COVID-19 thing that we're doing, and this is a good thing because this is how we love each other by connecting through technology, right? So, like Gary said, my name's Josh. For those that don't know me, another thing I'm really excited about is when we do get to meet. I feel like there's going to be so many more people that we get to connect with that we haven't met prior to having to go online. And I'm really excited about that. There's a lot of names that I see popping up that watch these services and that I haven't actually met in person. And so I'm really excited about that too. So I think we may have a boom, from when we last met, and a lot of people, we get to hug each other's necks. Nikki Parker, I can't wait to hug your neck because you always give me peace whenever I'm playing music. So I'm really excited about that too. So tonight, I do want to give some disclaimers, right? Some public service announcements. It's funny, I've talked at different events, keynotes before. I always give public service announcements for whatever reason. I don't know. I guess it's my my preacher joke before we get into the sermon. But I went to bed last night at 11:45 because I was working, and then I got up at 1:30 and worked all through the night, and I haven't slept. So who knows what I'll say? And if you walk away with anything from tonight, you will know that it was most definitely not of my power. So just know that it's somebody else working on your heart and emotions. So second public service announcement, and this is an important one, I think. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a seminary student. In fact, I am a seminary student dropout, or a Bible college dropout. It turns out I'm allergic to seminary, so I couldn't stay there for very long. I had to get out and do other things. But I say these things, jokingly, but I do just want to be very clear that I am just a guy who is moved by the life and teachings of Jesus. I think Jesus is a very significant figure in history. I believe that he is a divine being that came to earth to show us how to live, how to be human, and how to be a part of this life and to connect with each other. So when I was asked by the elder team to speak in July, I was excited, a bit not perplexed, but my thoughts were, what do I have to say? When it comes to spirituality and talking about Jesus, I fall under the category of you speak when you have something to say and you listen the rest of the time. So like I said, I've spoken at other events in front of crowds, and I love talking to people. I love connecting with people. In fact, I timed this message today, and it was like an hour and a half. So we're going to go for a while. I like to talk. Just kidding. But when it comes to talking about Jesus in a corporate context, I take pause. I take pause because when you speak into somebody's spiritual life and their spirituality, whatever it may be, you have a very you can change their life for the good or the bad, right? I think everybody has deconstructed a part of their faith at some point in their life, and that was due to teaching that was bad teaching, right? So when I was asked to speak, I gave pause and was like, what do I have to say? Like, this could really change somebody's life, not because I've got great things to say, but because I think Jesus lived a great life. And I truly believe that things can be changed by looking at the life of Jesus. Your life can be changed by looking at how he lived his life. And I want to be an instrument that pushes that in the correct direction. So I give pause. All I have to say, like I said, again, I'm just a guy who is moved by the words, teachings, just overall life of Jesus and who he was. So tonight, we are continuing on in our study of Luke. A few weeks ago, I was given 2 chapters to pull from, which is like asking me to find 3 grains of salt in the ocean, right? I mean, 2 chapters of the Gospels. I mean, it's 2 chapters of rich Jesus language, right? Rich, life-changing ways to live, how to be kind and loving to each other, It's just powerful, right? So there's so many things in these 2 chapters. I mean, we had the feeding of the five, big stories, right? Feeding of the 5,000. Jesus sends out the 70. The 70 return. You've got the Good Samaritan. You've got the Mary and Martha debacle, right? She was sitting at Jesus' feet. Martha was working. Like, so many great stories and so many things to pull from. And I'm like, man, I don't know what I'm going to pick, right? So tonight, we're going to talk about the title of my talk, and I call it a talk. My wife kept telling me that, it's a sermon and that you're preaching. And I'm like, I don't know. I can't bite off on that big of. I mean, that's a lot of weight with that, right? So I call it a talk. We can call it whatever we want, I guess. But we're going to discuss, for what many centuries this story has been referred to as the Good Samaritan. And to be really honest, when they said, Josh, will you talk about something from chapters 9 and 10 in Luke, I immediately told myself, don't discuss the Good Samaritan, right? This is, I typically like to pick things that haven't been overplayed, right? You got the radio, you're listening to the radio, and there's a new song out, and it's like every 7th song, the song just repeats itself. To eventually the point where you're just like, I don't want to ever hear that song again. Right. And I grew up in the church, and I remember the felt boards when I was little of the Good Samaritan. You put the characters on the felt board, and then the teacher told the story of the Good Samaritan. And so just personally, I was like, don't talk about this. Well, in typical fashion, whenever I say I'm not going to do something, it typically turns the other way, and I end up talking about it. So I'm about to ask you a question and expect a response. So again, it's weird, right, being on the screen. But the Enneagram, right? Some of you may be familiar with the Enneagram. I like it. I think it's a great tool. I'm not versed in it. Very, very little work have I done in learning deeply about it. My wife, Jo, loves the Enneagram. She's very wise when it comes to the Enneagram. She puts in the work and learns a lot about it. So I hope I make you proud, Jo, when I talk about these things. But I am a 7 with a fairly strong 8 wing, right? The Enneagram's 1 through 9. My number is a 7. I've got a strong 8 wing. And so I'm going to give you a really basic rundown of what a 7 is. And all this is going to tie into how I picked the Good Samaritan, and then we're going to dive in. But so a 7 is, I'm going to give you the key motivations and the key fears. The 7's motivation is contentedness, right? A good time, always wanting to look to the positive side of things, satisfaction, right? The fear of the 7 is being trapped, like boxed in. Don't put me in a corner. It freaks me out. I don't, not physically, but just, I don't like walls. I don't like boundaries. I like to be, free and to move about in my thoughts. But, so that's the 7, right? And so, to kind of break it down, basically, if you called me and you said, hey, Josh, let's go skydiving tomorrow, I'd say my answer would be, let's rent a motorcycle with a sidecar to get us to the airstrip. I'm pumped. Let's go skydiving, but let's make it even more. Let's make it even more extra, right? So that's my personality. How I landed on the Good Samaritan, however, comes from my 8 wing. And the 8's core motivation, and this is, again, basic, is being like a protector, someone who stands up for the oppressed, protects those in their tribe, someone who's not afraid of confrontation, and actually kind of enjoys confrontation a little bit. And I definitely have those pieces in my life. So that is how I landed on this passage, despite my initial thought of don't do this. And I also thought, there's a lot of people that may not have grown up in church and may not be familiar with this story. And it is a powerful story. Like, oh my goodness, it was moving. I read the passage so many times in the past few weeks. I even downloaded an audiobook of the book of Luke, chapter 10. The guy that read it had an English accent. It really made the text pop. But I don't think that it necessarily assisted in my understanding or centering around the passage. But it was nice. It was relaxing to listen to a different accent read the Bible than what I'm used to. So, but there's one line in the story, and we're going to get to it. It's going to take us a minute to get there, but we're going to get to it. And when you really look at it, it is like a megaphone that is life-changing. And I've read this story my whole life, and it's never jumped out at me like that, but it's huge, right? So, okay, so let's read the passage. We're going to dive in. I'm going to pull it up here. We're going to talk about what Jesus did to me this week, and hopefully I can portray that in a way to where he's going to change something in your life. Oh, wait, I'm looking at my notes here. I've got one more disclaimer, and this is maybe my one like really strong theological stance that I'll share tonight. And this is it. So if you read the Bible, anywhere in the Bible, anything in the Bible, if it doesn't look like Jesus, then you read it wrong. Okay, I'm going to say it again. If what you read in the Bible, anywhere in the Bible, doesn't look like Jesus, then you read it wrong. Okay, and the passage we're going to read tonight is going to be easy to keep that in mind because it is literally Jesus telling the story. But try that, when you read passages at home, try to read it and say, did I read this in a way that portrays the Jesus of the Gospels, right? And if you're not getting a loving, kind, compassionate, accepting, inclusive Jesus, then you read it wrong, right? So if you read it through the lens of Jesus, it'll be life-changing, no matter what you read, okay? All right, here we go. So chapter 10, verse 25. All right. Just then, a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And bam, right out of the gate, we've got conflict, right? I love it. So this lawyer, and when they say lawyer, they're talking about a religious lawyer. So this guy knew the Old Testament, like backwards and forward. And so when it says, the lawyer stood up to test Jesus, he really was. Like, he knew the law. The question is, what must I do to inherit eternal life? This guy knows the answer, right? You ever have those bosses or those teachers in school where they ask you a question and you can just see it like they already know the answer. And so you're kind of in a place like, if you don't know the answer, like, what do I say? Right? I used to deliver drywall when I lived in Denver, Colorado. And what we would take, thousands of pieces of drywall to new construction, hospitals, high rises. And we had to stack them really neat because the superintendent of the job, the general contractor, wanted a neat looking site. And sometimes he'd walk over after we're finished stacking and he'd go, does that look good to you? And I'd be like, yeah, does that look good to you? Yes, sir. Good to know. And then you walk off, right? You're like, what? What just happened? So he knew the answer, right? The lawyer knew the answer before he asked the question. So he knows the Old Testament and he already knows the answer to his question, but he calls Jesus out, right? He's like, I'm going to get this guy. We're going to see if he's the real deal, okay? Verse 26. He said to him, and this is Jesus talking, what is written in the law? What do you read there? Okay, Jesus knows. This guy knows his stuff. He's a religious lawyer. He knows the Old Testament, what it says. And in a classic Jesus response, right, he answers with another question, right? One thing I do love about Jesus and how he responds to those trying to trip him up, or even the disciples who are just confused, right? They ask questions. He turns the situation around to where, in the case of this lawyer, he's got to answer his own question and in turn realize the error of his worldview or just continue on in a state of confusion or not understanding, right? So verse 27. So the lawyer answered, he said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, this is Jesus, you have given the right answer. Do this and you will live. Right? The lawyer knows this answer as well. He's quoting Deuteronomy and Leviticus, the law. This is like his thing, right? He is the religious lawyer. He knows the text from the Old Testament. And he gives the answer, and Jesus is like, yeah, you got it, man. That's it. So it doesn't stop there, right? The lawyer doesn't take that. So, he now has to justify himself, right? So verse 29, it says, but wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Right? So he knew the answer to this question. Jesus knew he knew the answer to this question. And so at this point, Jesus was like, yeah, man, you got it. Go do that. Well, he's not good with that, right? Because now he's like, I just asked this silly question that everybody knows I should know. So he goes further. Well, tell me who my neighbor is, because now he wants specifics. He wants identifiers. And how often do we in the church at large here in America, do we not like the ambiguity of Jesus, the ambiguous nature of his answers, right? We want to, well, tell us exactly what we should and shouldn't do and who we should and shouldn't love, right? So this guy's calling him out and says, well, who is my neighbor? Because I want to know that I'm still, loving the right people and hating the right people, right? Or hating the wrong people. So he quotes the law. It was too ambiguous. He left out identifiers. So again, he tries to trip Jesus up, saying, well, who's my neighbor? And in the Hebrew context, right, this time period in history, the neighbor, so to this lawyer, a neighbor was those in his tribe, right? The ones that are close to him, the ones that look like him, the ones that believe like him, politically and religiously, right? And so he's thinking, okay, Jesus is one of us. I'm asking him who our neighbor is. Surely Jesus is about to justify what I'm about to say and explain what a neighbor was and what a neighbor was not. And then again, in classic Jesus fashion, a tale. And we're going to start at verse 30 in chapter 10. Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers, who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend. Here it is. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said, being the lawyer, it's an interesting answer, the one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. Right? What a tale. If there was ever a mic drop moment, this is definitely one of them for Jesus, right? In all the stories. Why? Well, let's go back in and let's understand the context of how the lawyer would have heard this story, right? So we've got characters in the story and the location. So the location being a road from Jericho or from Jerusalem to Jericho, right? He's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. Well, this was known as about a 12, 15 mile, it's not a road like we would think, right? It's a mountain trail, but it was known to have looters and robbers and thieves and hooligans. It was known that if you were going to travel that road, there's a really good possibility you'd get robbed or beaten. So it was known for this. So he knew this. He knew from Jerusalem to Jericho, this road, bad stuff, right? And then we got 4 characters in the story. So we've got the priest, and the priest here, we can assume that this is probably a Jewish priest, right? It doesn't say that, but I think it's safe to assume this. We've got a Levite who was a temple helper, an assistant to the priest, right? So he was a part of the religious um, framework of the Jewish culture, right? So you got the priest, you got the Levite, then you've got the generic man on the side of the road, right? The guy who was robbed, right? He's not labeled. We don't know his identity, his social class, his ethnicity. And this is important to the story. This is on purpose. And last, we have the Samaritan, right? It's known in that culture and that time frame in history that Samaritans hated the Jews, and vice versa, the Jews hated the Samaritans, right? It was a clash of beliefs. The Jews thought the Samaritans were unclean and so didn't treat them well, and in return, the Samaritans didn't treat the Jews well. So it was a classic cultural war, and they didn't like each other. And this is kind of a main point of a lot of whenever the story is told. This is kind of where they focus, right? You want to love your enemies, which is, I 100% agree. But what I want to do is go a little bit deeper, right? So we should love our enemies, but does it stop there? Like, how do we do it well, and where are we going to go? So let's keep going. So this lawyer knows all the characters in this story, right? He's in the culture. Jesus is telling the story to him. He knows what's going on. He knows the location. He understands the context of what Jesus is saying as the tale continues and the story goes on. So this guy gets robbed and beaten, right? So we're gonna kind of think from the lawyer's point of view here, the religious lawyer. The guy gets robbed and beaten within an inch of his life, right? Or at least half his life, right? He's half dead. By chance, a priest walks by, and the lawyer may be thinking, okay, the priest will check on him, right? This Jewish priest walking from Jerusalem to Jericho. He's going to check on him, right? Nope. Okay, well, maybe the lawyer's thinking, well, he's probably he's got something to do, right? He's got important things to do. He doesn't have time to stop, crosses the road, goes up, right? So, maybe he's got important things to do. This guy was unclean, and so he didn't have time. He was off somewhere else, okay? He didn't stop. Okay, well, so Jesus keeps telling the story. Well, the Levite enters the scene. Does he stop? No. Lawyer's like, okay, well, he's got religious duties. Maybe he was traveling with the priest and he was a little bit late, so he had to catch up to him to do whatever they're going to do in Jericho. Maybe he's justified. He didn't need to stop. He had to get to the church service on time. He had to stop by Starbucks and get a coffee on his way. He didn't have time to stop for this guy. He had places to go, right? Then the Samaritan enters, right? So now the lawyer's thinking, okay, I've heard this joke before, right? The one about the priest, the Levite, and a Samaritan crossing the road, right? No, man, here we go. The tables are about to start turning. Okay, the Samaritan stops. The lawyer's like, wait, hang on. This dude stops? The Samaritan? No, we don't like those guys. He's not stopping. That dude's unclean. He's not going to stop for this guy. He bandaged him. What? He poured oil and wine on his wounds. You got to be kidding me, right? Then put him on his own animal. And a side note, really quick, and I found this very interesting. And this is kind of like my medically minded brain, maybe. But when it says bandage wounds, in the context, the word used there is actually a technical medical procedure, right? So I don't know that the Samaritan was a doctor. Maybe he was. There might be an argument for that. But I think the point is that he didn't just go 50%, right? This dude was like taking care. This Samaritan was taking care of this unidentified person, right? He didn't just stop. He went all out, right? He wasn't meeting his quota of good deeds or anything like that. Oil and wine, like he was all in. He was all in. And in the passage it says, he was moved with compassion. Well, compassion is like a really muddled down English version of what the actual word is, right? The word is like he was moved deep down in his gut, right? A better word, maybe gut wrenching. So, think about those times where you've seen, somebody that's just hurting and you just feel it. You just feel it down in your gut. It's gut wrenching, or you hear a story of how somebody was oppressed or abused, and you're just like, man, gut wrenching. That's what this guy felt when he saw this guy on the side of the road, right? So he's going all out. Okay. Then he went to this inn, right? He put him on his donkey. We don't know how far he went. Maybe he made it to Jericho. Maybe there was an inn on the side of the road somewhere. But he paid what some suggest, scholars, people that study this full time, paid 2 months of room and board to the innkeeper. Like, well, hang on. So the Samaritan, the lawyer's just like, what? Like, the Samaritan is paying 2 months of room and board for this guy? Like, he's like, we don't even know who this guy is. Like, hang on, we don't know if this other guy is worth doing all this for. You haven't named who this was. This lawyer's just like tripping out. Okay, he's like, this guy's an enemy. This Samaritan is an enemy. What are you talking about? And he was. The Samaritan was an enemy to the Jewish lawyer, right? Who's pushing this issue of who is my neighbor. So the enemy's going all out for this unidentified man. Absolutely crazy. Right, this is at this time in the culture of the story. This is absurd, preposterous, right? Okay, and this is where I want to land on something that the Samaritan says. He says, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever it cost. This is open-ended. There's not an ending to this, right? I will come back, and I will repay you what it cost you. The Samaritan could have been exploited. This could cost more than he already had paid. This could hurt him. This is the insanity of love right here. Open-ended, right? What does your love look like? Does it look like the insanity of Jesus and what he's talking about in this story? Or does it look like indifference? Does your love require you to give up something? Sit and think about this. Ask these questions. Does your love require you to give something up? Or is it something you had capacity to give up in the first place? Does your loving hurt? Is it that gut-wrenching hurt? Does your love for others hurt? Does it cost you? You ever felt exploited for fully loving? Or did you not love enough because you could have been taken advantage of? I think the point of what is happening with the Samaritan is clear. That's not our concern. We should have so much love that it is not our concern if somebody takes advantage of us. Yeah, I'm not saying you go out all willy-nilly and just start throwing bills everywhere, but when you get that gut-wrenching, down deep, that gut-wrenching, when you see somebody in need, it doesn't matter if you get exploited, right? That's love. That's the insanity of love. Okay, so there's three keys that I want to talk about here to the insanity of love from this story. Okay, first one being this: love intentionally looks. Okay, not love sees, right? The priest and the Levite, they saw, and they crossed the road and kept on going to Jericho. No, the insanity of love says that love intentionally is looking, right? It doesn't just see a need and say a prayer or a blessing or, love is looking for moments in time to be insane. Love is looking for moments in time to be insane. Okay, number 2, love acts. Insane love is called to action when it sees a need. Okay, Bob Goff has a book, and the title of it is brilliant. It's called Love Does. That's exactly right. Love does. He talks about, there's a story in that particular book where he got bored with Bible study, right? Because you go and you just learn a bunch of facts. And he was into doing, right? So he started a Bible study with some friends. He's been doing it for years, and they call it Bible doing. not Bible study. Like, how can we take the words from Jesus and put them into action, right? The insanity of love calls us to act. Love acts. And the third key here, love always shows back up. Just like the Samaritan. Hey, here's 2 months of stay, and I'll come back, and if I owe more, right? And let's not even miss the fact that this guy stayed overnight with the unidentified man, right? Because it says in the morning he got up and paid the innkeeper. So he didn't just drop him off. This dude stayed through the night. That's the insanity of love. He didn't know this guy. He was an unidentified person in the story, right? But this guy stayed overnight and then paid 2 months rent and said, I'll come back. I'm going to check on him. This isn't the end, right? And this is something that I really want to portray, because I'm very passionate about what I'm about to say. When we separate ourselves or exclude people or a certain group, Jesus immediately walks across our line that we've created to our enemy and invites us to join him with those that we exclude, right? Or our enemies. When we separate ourselves or exclude people or a certain group, Jesus immediately walks across our line to join our enemies, and then he looks and he invites us to come on over. That's the insanity of love, right? Because when you exclude, you become the oppressor, and that's not Jesus. When you exclude, you become the oppressor, and that's not Jesus. Right? So you give 10 bags of clothes to charity. Were those clothes you never wore anymore? Did you gain from giving them up? Do you have other clothes to wear? That's not insane loving. It's good. You should, yeah. You should give things like that to charity. But that shouldn't stop, right? That's not the insanity of love, right? The guy on the corner that you gave $5 to, did that hurt you? Did you suffer for that? Was that a closed issue? You gave $5, you're done. Like, my good deeds are done for the day. That's not insane loving. It's loving. It's good, but it's not insane loving. It's not the story of the Good Samaritan, right? It's stopping. The insanity of love is open-ended, right? We intentionally are looking, we're acting, and we're showing back up. It's living and breathing and hurting and caring and compassionate and moving and hard, and it's just insane. Loving our world is living and breathing and hurting and caring and compassionate and moving and hard, and it is just insane. And that's what we're called to do, because that's Jesus. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote a sermon on this passage of Scripture, the Good Samaritan. He states, "We are all called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly robbed. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring." The insanity of love. All right, let's go deeper. Students about to start back at school, right? How about that person at school that's down? The one that gets verbally abused, walks alone, sits alone. Maybe they get beat up. And like the story, they're left for dead. It takes more than just picking up their books or saying hi to them in the hallway. Insanity of love, it says it's an open-ended love. Invite them over, call them, listen to them, be with them. Love insanely. Be Jesus. Right now, in this moment in history, the Black community is the man on the side of the road. They're hurting. The LGBTQ community is the man on the side of the road. They're hurting. the incarcerated, the single mom, the single dad, the cancer patient, the ones that have lost their job, the hungry, the lonely, the depressed, the confused, the weak, the poor, the abused. They're all on the side of the road, and it will hurt, and it will cost us, and it will exploit us. But to fully love, insanely, we must show up, because Jesus, who loved insanely, showed up, and it cost him, and it hurt him. And he hung on that cross, and it was hard, but he showed up, and it will cost you everything. Insane love continually shows up, and it's open-ended. Be their bandage. Be their oil and wine. Love insanely. Be Jesus. Despite the pain, the hurt, the exploitation, or cost, always show back up. Love insanely. It gets me every time. So I'm going to finish up here, and I'm going to read the lyrics of a chorus to a song that's about to be sung. And it kicks so hard, it breaks your bones. Cuts so deep, hits your soul. Tears your skin and makes your blood flow. It's better that we know that love is hard. Thanks for listening.